Had the scoring judges check their ballots, and I think we're all good.
All right, then I will change the host, and you are good to begin. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, let's call the case of Estates of Genesis Petrillo versus Peony Estates and Harper Martini. My name is Judge Vic Davenigam. You can just call me Judge Vic if you'd like. Scoring judges, please look to the two bottom buttons on the lower left of your screen. Remember to keep your audio and video off unless told to do otherwise. Also, you should have your video set to hide all non-video participants. This means only the people on the screen right now should be the advocates and me. Is the plaintiff ready to begin?
Yes, Your Honor. But before we begin, may we make appearances before the court?
Absolutely. I was just going to ask if the defense is ready as well.
Yes, Your Honor. The defense is ready for trial.
All right. If the plaintiff wants to announce, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Lucas Caldwell, and I'm joined by my co-counsel, Miss Jessica Turner.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
And Miss Megan Selane.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
And today we represent the estate of Genesis Petrillo.
The defense?
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon. My name is Dwight Payton, and today I'm joined here with my co-counsels, Dominique Williams.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
And Ferrum of Raucus.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Together we will be representing the defense, Harper Martini.
Excellent. Are there any housekeeping matters we need to take up before we begin?
Yes, Your Honor. Now, before we begin, we would like to constructively tender documents to the bench, which include the complaint, the answer, the available case law, other statutory law, stipulations, special instructions, and a pretrial order from Judge Frank Galuzza.
I've received copies of all that information, and the court will take judicial notice of the file and all the contents contained within.
Yes, Your Honor. I would like to draw your attention to the stipulations, specifically stipulation 3, which states that exhibits 1 through 10 are pre-admitted and may be used in opening and closing statements in today's case. And I would also like to draw your attention to the pretrial order of Judge Frank Galuzza. Now, this order states that Peony Estates has established that they did not violate Code 12100 of the Midlands Building Code and is barred from discussing any topic related to Peony Estates storage and use of pesticides.
It's noted.
And we would also like to invoke Rule 615, the constructive sequestration of witnesses, barring party representatives. And the plaintiff does not have a party representative in today's case, and the defense party representative is the defendant, Harper Martini.
All right. Are all the witnesses present?
One more thing, Your Honor. We would also like to invoke Rule 603, assuming that all witnesses are pre-sworn for the interest of time.
All right. All the witnesses present, the rule has been invoked, and that's the rule against comparative testimony. What that means is from here on out, you can discuss your testimony with only the attorneys and no one else. You can't discuss it amongst yourselves or with any other spectators, any other individuals. Even after you testify, you're still not released from the rule unless I release you from the rule. And so I'll have everybody at this time raise your right hand. And do you swear the testimony you're about to give today is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? That's for all the witnesses. I will assume that they have all taken the oath. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. All the witnesses have taken the oath, and the court will note for the record they've all been sworn in. Are we ready to proceed with opening statements?
The defense just has a few pre-trial matters, Your Honor.
All right, go ahead.
So first and foremost, just for a bit of background in this case, so the plaintiff is pursuing a claim of civil battery, which means that today they have to prove, 1, whether or not the act in contention was an act by the defendant, and 2, whether or not the defendant had an intent to cause harmful or offensive contact, And 3, whether or not the defendant made that harmful or offensive contact to the plaintiff. And, Your Honor, it's commonly assumed that in this jurisdiction, all objections are heard outside the earshot of the jury. May we assume the same in your court?
It will be done constructively.
Yes, Your Honor, and we would also like to ask your preferences for screen sharing. Would you like us to ask before we share our screens, or would you just like us to preserve the record?
I think it'd be preferable to go ahead and let us know, give us the heads up that you're sharing the screen. If there's a document or some sort of photograph that is objectionable, then we'll take that up at that time.
Understood, Your Honor. And staying on the topic of screen sharing, may we request permission to briefly share our screens to make sure that you and the other members of the jury have no problems viewing exhibits throughout today's trial?
That's fine.
Thank you, Your Honor. Can you see that all right?
I can.
Perfect. So finally, we would like to ask that due to this online format, when showing exhibits on the screen that have not yet been admitted into evidence, that those exhibits be shown constructively outside the eye shot of the jury until they've been admitted.
So that will be the procedure.
Thank you, Your Honor. And that's all the pre-trial matters from the defense, and Harper Martini is ready for trial.
Excellent. All right, let's go ahead and begin. Does the plaintiff have an opening statement they'd like to give?
Yes, Your Honor, just one moment to prepare the courtroom. May I proceed?
You may.
Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury, may it please the court. A desperate plan gone too far. We are here today because a tragedy occurred on June 8th, 2019. This was the day that Genesis Petrillo died. This was also the day that he was supposed to marry the love of his life, Casey Soto. The evidence will show that Casey's own mother, Harper Martini, gifted Genesis with a bottle of wine laced with pesticides. Members of the jury, this death is a tragedy that could have been avoided. But the evidence will show that the defendant, Harper Martini, purposefully put pesticides in Genesis's wine bottle with the intent to harm him because she had a desperate plan that went too far. And because of this, the estate of Genesis Petrillo is suing Harper Martini for civil battery. Let me take you back to the beginning. The defendant in today's case, Harper Martini, is the owner of Peony Estates Winery, where the wedding rehearsal took place. The evidence will show that the two things the defendant loved the most were her daughter, Casey, and her winery. In fact, the defendant wanted Casey to take over the winery one day. But the defendant's perfect plan changed when Genesis and Casey got engaged in July of 2018. The defendant never liked Genesis. And as Genesis and Casey's wedding loomed nearer, tensions between the defendant and Genesis reached their breaking point. With this voicemail, Genesis left the defendant just weeks before the wedding. I'm going to Paris after the wedding, and Casey is coming with me. You'll never see any of us. Find someone else to run your sad little winery. The defendant tried to persuade Genesis and Casey not to go through with the wedding, but it didn't work. So it was at this point that the defendant came up with a new plan to poison Genesis Petrillo, to get the upper hand for once, and to just maybe stop the wedding right in its tracks, to buy herself more time with Casey. But the evidence will show that the defendant took this plan one step too far. The poison the defendant used in the wine bottle was strong, so strong that it didn't just harm Genesis as the defendant had intended. It killed him. How do we know the defendant had a plan to stop the wedding? Because multiple witnesses will testify to hearing the defendant constantly and continually make comments about getting rid of Genesis. Among these witnesses is Sam Arnold, the caterer for Genesis and Casey's wedding. And she'll not only explain that she heard these comments, but she'll testify to seeing a can of pesticide on a kitchen table right next to a bottle of Cara wine meant just for Genesis. Angel Rodriguez, Genesis and Casey's best friend, heard these comments too. She will not only testify to what she heard, but to what she saw. Genesis drinking from that same bottle of Cara wine at the wedding rehearsal. And she will explain the events of the wedding rehearsal night leading up to taking Genesis to the hospital. Angel was at the hospital when the gravity of the defendant's desperate plan became real, and Genesis died. You will be hearing from one of Genesis's doctors, Dr. Jamin Kwan. And Dr. Kwan will explain Genesis' symptoms, their progression, and what ultimately led to his death. Organophosphate pesticide poisoning. Members of the jury, as the plaintiff in this case, we hold the burden of proof in today's trial. That means that we must prove to you, by a preponderance of the evidence, meaning more likely than not, that the defendant, Harper Martini, purposefully put pesticides in Genesis's wine bottle with the intent to cause harmful or offensive contact to Genesis, that this action was the direct and proximate cause of the harm that Genesis Petrillo suffered. I want to be clear that an intent to harm does not necessarily mean an intent to kill. Perhaps the defendant didn't mean to kill Genesis by putting the poison in the wine bottle, but he certainly meant to harm him. Because of this, a young man is dead. At the end of today's trial, my co-counsel Luke Caldwell will stand before you and explain exactly how the defendant's desperate plan went too far, and he will ask you to find the only verdict the evidence demands. He will ask you to find Harper Martini liable for civil battery. Thank you.
Thank you. Would the defense like to make an opening statement at this time or reserve the opening?
I'll make it now, Your Honor.
All right, you may proceed.
May it please the court. When tragedies like this happen, it makes sense to want justice, to find someone accountable. But members of the jury, sometimes there's not always someone to blame. And that's because not every story has a villain. And this story starts off with Harper Martini. Harper Martini is a single parent, a successful winery owner, and a loving mother. And what you'll hear today is that she is not the villain. Throughout today's trial, plaintiff will point fingers at Harper Martini. You will hear today that Genesis Petrillo and Harper said some cruel things to each other. Now, plaintiff wants you to believe that their rough relationship made Harper Martini kill Genesis. But members of the jury, I don't want you to just pay attention to what you're going to hear today. I want you to pay attention to what you won't hear today. And what you won't hear is that Harper Martini intentionally poisoned Genesis Petrillo. You won't hear that Harper Martini poured pesticide into a bottle of wine, and you won't hear that Genesis died from pesticide poisoning. But today you will hear that pesticides were in the wine at Peony Estates. Plaintiff wants you to believe that Harper Martini took pesticide, poured it into a bottle of wine, intentionally gave that bottle of wine to Genesis Petrillo so that Genesis would die. But what Miss Turner didn't mention once is that pesticide is in almost everything that we consume. And you'll hear from the head winemaker at Peony Estates, and she'll tell you that Peony Estates had safe, legal levels of pesticide in all of their products. Today we're going to bring to the stand the doctor who determined Genesis's cause of death. The doctor will tell you that Genesis did have pesticides in her system, but that the pesticides did not cause her death. Instead, members of the jury, you'll hear that Genesis's death was caused by alcohol poisoning. The doctor will tell you that on June 7th, 2019, the amount of alcohol Genesis drinks isn't just dangerous, it's deadly. You'll hear that she drinks champagne, numerous glasses of wine, several cocktails, and multiple shots of tequila. And you'll hear that eventually that drinking catches up to her. Because, ladies and gentlemen, the doctor will tell you today that this tragedy was caused by the large amount of alcohol Genesis drank, heightening the effects of the safe levels of pesticide in his system. The doctor will tell you that if Genesis had not drank such a large amount of alcohol, plaintiff would not be trying to make Harper Martini the villain. At the end of today's trial, to prove their battery claim, plaintiff must prove to you 3 things. 1, they must prove to you that Harper Martini intended to poison Genesis Petrillo. 2, that Harper actually did poison Genesis Petrillo. And 3, that pesticide poisoning was the cause of Genesis's death. And ladies and gentlemen of the jury, they have to prove all of this to you by a preponderance of the evidence. So by the end of today's trial, their story has to add up. It has to be more likely than any other explanation there is. It sounds easy to blame Harper Martini, but we aren't here to do the easiest thing. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here to do the right thing. And members of the jury, what you'll know by the end of today's trial is that unlike a fairy tale, this story has no villain, especially not Harper Martini. Find Harper Martini not liable. Thank you.
Thank you. Would the plaintiff like to call their first witness?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, plaintiff calls Angel Rodriguez to the stand.
All right, you may proceed.
Could you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Hello, everyone. I am Miss Angel Rodriguez.
And what do you do for a living, Miss Rodriguez?
I'm a kindergarten teacher at Rapid River Valley Elementary School.
And why are you here today?
I'm here today because I want to bring justice to Genesis and his family by shedding light on what Harper Martini did to my best friend.
Well, let's take a step back. Who is Genesis?
Genesis is my best friend who I met back in 2016, along with his future fiance, Casey Soto.
And how is your relationship with Genesis Petrillo and Casey Soto?
We clicked instantly. Well, we clicked instantly after we had a few drinks. I mean, I feel like I had known them for forever. And a few years later, our friend group heard that Casey and Genesis were getting married. We couldn't have been any happier.
And were you involved with the wedding planning at all?
Absolutely. Our whole friend group actually got all together to plan the wedding. It was amazing. We picked the colors, the theme, the menu. We were so excited. We even chose the venue. We decided the wedding would be held at Rosie and Pedro. It was perfect until Harper came into the picture.
Who is Harper?
Harper Martini is Casey's mom, and she just started taking over the wedding right away. It was very frustrating to watch.
And how was the wedding planning going now that the defendant was involved?
The situation got really tense. We were all really upset because we all decided to have the wedding, of course, at Rosie and Pedro, and suddenly it was changed to Peony Estates Winery. So to keep things calm, we decided to have a little shindig at the Black Bear Hotel.
And when was this party at the Black Bear Hotel?
It was actually May 11th, 2019.
And were the issues between Mr. Petrillo and the defendant ever brought up at this party?
Unfortunately, they were brought up. I remember hearing Casey and Genesis argue about how Harper was handling the wedding planning. It was really chaotic. And then I remember Casey stormed away and Genesis told me he had to make a phone call and he rushed outside.
And did you go outside with Genesis?
No, I didn't. I decided to just stay out of it. But I later learned that he made a phone call to Harper, but she didn't pick up. So Genesis left her a voicemail.
And have you read a transcript of this voicemail before you showed up to court today?
Yes, I have, sir.
And would you recognize a transcript of that voicemail if I showed it to you today?
Yes, sir, I will.
At this time, Exhibit 8 should be... One moment. second, Your Honor. Okay. Now, what does this voicemail say?
Well, Genesis told Harper that, of course, he and Casey were moving to Paris and that he would never, ever have to see them or their future kids again. He even talked about how poorly Harper treated them and that Harper didn't deserve any of them.
Thank you. Now, I'd like to talk to you about the rehearsal dinner. When was the rehearsal dinner?
It was June 7th of 2019.
And how was the beginning of the night?
It was awful. Harper and Genesis just kept fussing at one another. I mean, it was awful. At one point, Harper said Genesis should leave and save the family the headache. Otherwise, I'll make you disappear.
What happened after the defendant said that?
That's when Harper really became a monster. Harper violently grabbed Genesis' arm and yanked him out in the hallway to keep bickering. My 5-year-old students will have to keep their hands better to themselves than Harper does.
Did you see the defendant again that night?
Yeah, I think it was just an hour before dinner. I was walking down the hall and I saw Harper walking towards the kitchen with a can of pesticide. I thought it was a bit wacky, so of course I asked Harper, what do you have the can for? And Harper said, it's for Genesis. What Harper said really scared me.
Now, how was Mr. Petrillo once the rehearsal dinner actually started?
Well, I remember that when Harper began to speak, for his speech, that Genesis was shaking a lot and he was really anxious. And he was also drinking a lot less than he usually does, and a lot less than someone who is about to get married would.
Did Mr. Petrillo ever start drinking more throughout the night?
Yeah, slowly he did. We actually all received bottles of wine from Harper, of course, as a wedding gift. Most of us got bottles of Horizon, except for Genesis, who got a bottle of Cara. Once Genesis got the bottle of Cara, he began drinking a lot more.
And would you recognize this bottle of Cara along with the label to that bottle if I were to show it to you today?
Yes, sir, I would.
At this time, exhibits 2A and B should be screen sharing. Now, Ms. Rodriguez, is this the bottle of Cara that you saw the defendant hand Mr. Petrillo?
Yes, sir, that's the bottle.
And is this the label to that bottle?
Yes, sir, exact same label.
And have they been changed or altered in any way?
No, sir, they have not.
Now, did you see anyone except Mr. Petrillo drink from this bottle of Cara?
Well, I actually did just have one sip. I was just looking for a new wine to try out to give to my fellow teachers. So I had just a tiny sip, but I spit it out immediately. It was disgusting. It tasted like cafeteria food. Besides me having that awful small sip that I spit out, I saw no one else drink the bottle of Cara.
And did you see how much wine Mr. Petrillo drank from this bottle of Cara?
Yeah, he actually had several glasses of wine, almost the full bottle, before he got up and started dancing. And that's when I knew something was terribly wrong.
Why did you think something was wrong?
Well, his speech was really slurred and he had a major lack of coordination. Thinking back to the past times we had gone out and, done things as friends, I had never seen him act like this. I've seen him drink a lot more than a couple glasses of wine and of course be okay. So his behavior was very concerning.
Now, did Mr. Petrillo ever get better as the night went on?
Unfortunately, he didn't. I remember he was just sweating and throwing up profusely. And I just kept asking him, what can I do to help you? How can I help? And he just sat up and he said 911 and passed out on the bathroom floor. I quickly called for an ambulance.
And did you go to the hospital with Mr. Petrillo?
I did. I rode with him actually to the hospital. He was my best friend. I waited with him all night until around 8 a.m. the following morning when a doctor approached me and said that Genesis had slipped into a coma due to some kind of poisoning.
Now, what did you do after the doctors told you that Mr. Petrillo had been poisoned?
Well, after I heard that his condition was getting worse, I rushed back to Peony State to tell Casey. And as I was walking in, the first person I saw was Harper. And before I even got a word out, Harper said, Genesis got poisoned? Oh no, we'll have to cancel the wedding. Go tell Casey. I hadn't said anything about Genesis being sick, much less about him being poisoned. How did Harper know any of that?
Thank you. I have no further questions at this time.
May proceed?
With cross-examination, Your Honor? I'm assuming.
Yes, ma'am.
Awesome. Now, Miss Rodriguez, can you hear me all right?
Yes, ma'am, I can. Can you?
Yes, I can. I just want to start by talking about some of your relationships with the people involved in the wedding.
Okay.
Now, as you mentioned on direct, you were really close with Genesis and Casey.
Yes, we were all best friends.
But before the wedding actually started, you only met Harper Martini one time.
Yes, that is true.
And Harper did start to get very, very involved in the wedding process.
Yeah, I still just can't believe that, Harper changed the venue from Rosie and Pedro to Peony Estates Winery.
So that's a yes to my question that Harper was very involved in the wedding process.
Yes, extremely involved.
Now, Casey was Harper's only child, right?
Yes.
And you don't really know about the relationship between Genesis and Harper Martini.
No, only what I've heard through passing bits and arguments.
Now, you were actually surprised that anyone couldn't like Genesis, right?
Yeah, of course. He's my best friend. He's so likable and lovable.
Exactly. Genesis is your best friend.
Exactly.
And it surprised you that Harper didn't like Genesis.
Yeah, extremely surprising.
But you don't know why Miss Martini didn't like Genesis.
No.
Let's talk about another time that you saw them interact. On direct examination, you mentioned that they went to a party on May 11th, 2019 at the Black Bear Casino, right?
Yes, ma'am, we did.
And when they were at that party, that's when Genesis made that phone call that you saw, Exhibit 8, right?
Yes, that's true.
Now, after you saw the phone call, the very next morning, you actually spoke with Genesis, right?
I did. Yes, that is true, ma'am.
Genesis told you that she needed to apologize to Harper.
Objection, Your Honor, to the statements of Genesis Petrillo.
What's the objection?
To hearsay.
A response, Your Honor?
A response.
Your Honor, this is actually an exception to hearsay under 8033. It's a then existing mental state describing a motive, intent, or plan. Genesis saying I needed to apologize to Miss Martini is describing her intent to apologize to her. It's actually an exception.
Overruled.
So Mr. Petrillo, my apologies. He told you that he needed to apologize to Miss Martini.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of odd, but he did.
Now I talk about something else that she mentioned on direct, something about the actual day of the wedding rehearsal. Now, the day of the wedding rehearsal, you said that you saw Harper carry a can of pesticides, right?
Yeah, I did. It was kind of odd.
And on direct, when asked about why you said that, you asked her why, right?
Yes, of course.
And on direct, you said it was because she said it was for Genesis, right?
Yeah, it was really scary. I don't know why he would say anything like that.
Well, that's not exactly what Miss Martini said, right?
She said it's for Genesis. And then...
Well, I'm sorry, Miss Rodriguez, but she actually said it's for pests like Genesis, right?
Yes, ma'am.
But you actually know that she was kidding when she made this statement.
She laughed and said, just kidding, but...
Objection, Your Honor. The question calls for speculation as to the mindset of Harper Martini.
Overruled. She can testify as to what she observed.
Yes, Your Honor.
So it's a yes to my question that you know that Miss Martini was just kidding when she said that that pesticide was just for Genesis, right?
She laughed and said she was just kidding, but it was an awful statement to hear.
I'm not asking if it was an awful statement to hear. I'm just asking if you know Miss Martini was joking, and she was, right?
Yes.
She told you that she actually planned to use the pesticides to go kill a cockroach.
Yes, that is actually what she told me.
Okay, let's talk a little bit more about how the actual dinner rehearsal went.
Okay.
Now, during the dinner rehearsal, everyone in the wedding party sat at the same table, right?
Yes.
There was Harper Martini.
Yes.
There was Casey, her daughter,
Of course.
and there was Genesis.
Yes.
You sat directly next to Genesis, right?
Yes, I did.
And you remember seeing Genesis drink several glasses of champagne.
I saw him drink several glasses of wine, ma'am.
You also
I
saw him
also-
drink, right?
I also did see him drink the glasses of champagne, ma'am.
Okay, so that's a yes to my question that you saw Genesis drink several glasses of champagne. I'm not talking about the wine quite yet.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, ma'am.
Now, at 10 p.m., that's when Miss Martini actually made the toast to Genesis Petrillo.
Yes, I do remember.
It was a pretty sincere toast.
I guess you could say so. I thought that he was poking fun. I thought that she was poking fun at Jen, but I mean.
And this is when Miss Martini gave everyone in the wedding party a bottle of wine.
Yes, we all received bottles of Horizon except for Genesis, who received a bottle of Cara.
Exactly, Genesis received the bottle of Cara wine.
Yes, ma'am.
And this bottle of wine, it was unopened when you first saw it.
As far as I can tell, yes, ma'am.
It was corked and sealed.
As far as I could tell, yes, ma'am.
You actually saw Genesis open the bottle, right?
Yes, and of course, pour glasses.
And when Genesis opened the bottle, Miss Martini was still sitting at that table next to you guys, right?
Yes, that is true.
And Genesis offered everyone at the table to take a sip of that Cara wine.
Yes, I was actually the only one who said yes to his offer.
I know you're the only one who said yes, but she still, Mr. Petrillo still offered it to everyone at the table, right?
Yes, ma'am, that is true.
He offered it to Casey.
Yes.
Now, there seems to be some implication that Miss Martini intentionally poisoned the bottle of Cara wine. But when Casey was offered this bottle, Miss Martini never stopped Casey from accepting it, right?
As far as I can remember, no.
And you were actually offered a little bit of this wine.
Yes, I was.
And Miss Martini never stopped you from drinking it either.
No, she did not.
Let's talk a little bit more about what Genesis drank that night. Now, after this toast happened, you and Genesis went to the bar and had a couple cocktails.
Yes.
And over the next hour, Genesis drank the rest of that bottle of Cara wine.
Yes.
Then you saw Genesis order tequila shots for the entire group.
Yes, he did.
You didn't think this was a good idea at this point, right?
No, it was getting kind of late. Just really want to wrap up for the evening. And not to mention, he was just acting a little different.
But you can't tell us how many shots of tequila Mr. Petrillo had that night, can you?
No, I was talking with other people in the wedding party, moving around. I wasn't with him the entire evening.
Your Honor, we passed the witness.
Anything further from this witness?
No, Your Honor. I just asked that this witness be allowed to step down.
You may step down, Ms. Rodriguez. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a great evening.
You too. Next witness for the plaintiff, please.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the plaintiff calls Dr. Jimin Kwan to the stand.
Okay. This witness has been previously sworn. You may proceed.
Please introduce yourself to the jury.
Hello, my name is Dr. Jimin Kwan.
What do you do for a living, Dr. Kwan?
I'm the chief emergency physician here at Rapid River Valley Hospital in Midlands.
Why are you here today?
Well, I treated Genesis Petrillo on the night of his death. Due to this, I was asked to recount my examination on that night, as well as shed some light on what could have caused his symptoms.
Well, before we get into that, can you tell us a little bit about your education?
Certainly. I received my Bachelor's of Science in Biology with a minor in Chemistry from Georgia Tech. I then went on to get my medical degree from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill.
Can you tell us about your past work experience that would qualify you to testify today?
Of course. I completed my residency at Emory's Department of Emergency Medicine. I then went on to take a fellowship in medical toxicology, which is where I get my expertise. In fact, throughout my career, I've published several articles on medical toxicology and emergency medicine.
And what articles have you published on medical toxicology and emergency medicine?
Well, there are 5 of them, but one specifically pertinent to this case is entitled An Accident or a Therapeutic Chain of Events, Common Misdiagnoses in Medical Toxicology and How to Correct Them. And another is entitled A Woman's Weapon or an Unfortunate Accident, an analysis of U.S. poisoning cases.
What data and evidence did you use to prepare your report in today's case?
I used the toxicology and laboratory testing report, the death certificate of Genesis Petrillo, the analytical report of Mr. Petrillo's wine bottle, the affidavit of Angel Rodriguez, and the alcohol impairment chart. Of course, my main data came from my examination of Mr. Petrillo on that night.
Was this information enough for you to draw conclusions in this case?
Yes, ma'am, it was more than sufficient.
And what methods did you use to come to your conclusions?
I examined Genesis Petrillo per physician standards, stabilizing her systems, taking samples, and performing a hypothesis, as well as ordering tests and reports to confirm that hypothesis. In addition, I reviewed any and all necessary or relevant exhibits and reports for this case.
Did you reliably apply these methods to your conclusions in today's case?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, I want to start off by talking about your initial encounter with Mr. Petrillo. When did you first see him?
I first encountered Mr. Petrillo on June 8th, 2019, when he came into the emergency room.
How was Mr. Petrillo when you first saw him?
When Mr. Petrillo first came in, he was vomiting, had slurred speech, and indicated some stomach cramps as well as tightness in the chest. Due to how severe these symptoms were, I admitted him for a full examination.
What did you do in order to complete this full examination?
Well, I approached his case as an alcohol poisoning case. I took his vitals, examined his cardiovascular system, and took samples of his vomit. However, it was during this examination that I noticed things that did not point towards alcohol poisoning at all.
What did you notice that made you believe Mr. Petrillo could have been experiencing something other than alcohol poisoning?
Well, to start, Mr. Petrillo's pupils were contracted, and generally, alcohol dilates your pupils. In addition, he was experiencing symptoms that weren't related to alcohol poisoning, such as involuntary muscle twitching and excessive tearing. And lastly, Mr. Petrillo's pulse had slowed, and generally, alcohol promotes a weak yet rapid pulse.
So based on these symptoms, what did you decide to do next?
I ordered a poisons and toxins analysis in addition to the toxicology report.
Why did you order a poisons and toxins analysis?
I had started to suspect that Mr. Petrillo had ingested something other than alcohol. Specifically, I believed he had ingested an organophosphate poison. In fact, his symptoms perfectly matched a pesticide poisoning case.
What is organophosphate poison?
It's a type of poison commonly used in insecticides, and what it does is it prevents the creation of an enzyme called acetylcholinesterase, eventually leading to nervous system failure. Now, this is very dangerous to humans as it can cause nervous system failure in even small doses. Due to this, I had to begin working as fast as I could.
How can a person be exposed to poison by organophosphate?
There are 3 main vectors, but the one that most closely related Genesis' symptoms was an oral ingestion of the poison.
Once you discovered that Mr. Petrillo had likely ingested the poison, how did you proceed?
I began administering an antidote right away. Mr. Petrillo's symptoms were extremely advanced. He was near death at that time, so it was imperative I worked as fast as I could.
And was this antidote successful?
Unfortunately, no. A few minutes after I administered the antidote, Mr. Petrillo had a coughing fit and a seizure, and then fell into a coma that he never woke up from. He died at 9:27 a.m. on June 8th, 2019.
Now I want to talk to you a little bit about the testing you did on Mr. Petrillo. When did you receive those results?
I received both the initial results and the toxicology report shortly after Mr. Petrillo's death.
Would you recognize a copy of the unknown poisons and toxins analysis portion of that report if I were to show it to you today?
Yes, ma'am.
We should be screen sharing Exhibit 6, which is the unknown poisons and toxins analysis portion of the result, and this has already been pre-admitted into evidence. Dr. Kwan, is this that copy?
Yes, ma'am. This is the unknown poisons and toxins analysis portion of the report.
Is it a fair and accurate copy?
Yes, ma'am.
Has it been changed or altered in any way?
No, ma'am.
Dr. Kwan, according to this analysis, what did Mr. Petrillo's results show?
The results showed that Mr. Petrillo had low acetylcholinesterase levels, and an organophosphate pesticide was present in his blood. Examination of his stomach contents confirmed he had been drinking wine earlier that evening. An examination of that wine confirmed that it had the same organophosphate pesticide in it.
Dr. Kwan, what are your overall conclusions regarding Mr. Petrillo's cause of death?
I can say to a
Objection,
reasonable...
Your Honor. Under Rule 702, this is an improper opinion by an expert witness. Your Honor, when laying the foundational questions of Dr. Kwan, opposing counsel asked if this was a reliable method. Dr. Kwan did not meet the prong of 702C, which shows that this testimony is the product of reliable principles and methods. And if I turn your attention to case law, Tarot Readers Association v. Merrill Dow, Your Honor, would you like me to pull that case law up?
I'm familiar with Merrill Dow.
Can I continue then?
Yes, you may.
Okay. Your Honor, under Tarot Readers Association v. Merrill Dow, in assessing the reliability of Rule 702C, the judges should consider whether the theory or technique has been tested, whether it's been subject to peer review and publication, whether it has a known error rate, and whether it has gained wide acceptance within the field. Your Honor, opposing counsel laid none of this foundation, and therefore it's an improper opinion under Rule 702.
So is your objection that the foundation's not made for this opinion?
Yes, Your Honor.
I'm going to overrule that objection. I think there's been sufficient foundation laid. There was no objection to him being offered as an expert. I think we're going to overrule that and proceed.
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, Dr. Kwan, what are your overall conclusions regarding Mr. Petrillo's cause of death?
I can say to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty that Mr. Petrillo ingested wine contaminated with an organophosphate pesticide in the evening of June 7th, 2019, and that pesticide is what ultimately caused his death.
Thank you, Dr. Kwan. I have no further questions at this time, and I tender this witness for cross-examination.
You may proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Kwan, I want to talk about what you just mentioned on direct. Mr. Petrillo's cause of death. Now, you said that Mr. Petrillo died from pesticide poisoning, right?
Correct, he did.
All right, well, let's talk about some of those symptoms that Mr. Petrillo exhibited.
Certainly.
Mr. Petrillo had nausea.
Yes, he did.
And that's a telltale sign of alcohol poisoning, isn't it?
It's a general symptom of a lot of illnesses, but it is an alcohol poisoning, correct?
And Mr. Petrillo was vomiting when he came into the hospital.
He had some vomit on his shirt, yes.
And that's another sign of alcohol poisoning.
Of poisoning in general, but yes, alcohol poisoning does fall under that umbrella.
Mr. Petrillo had slurred speech.
Yes, he did.
He had stomach pains.
Yes, ma'am.
And he also had slowed breathing.
Correct, he was breathing a little bit more labored.
And all of these symptoms are also consistent with alcohol poisoning, aren't they?
Yes, ma'am. They are some of the more hallmark symptoms.
And in fact, Dr. Kwan, alcohol poisoning can even lead to respiratory arrest, right?
In extremely high doses of alcohol, it can.
But that's a yes to my question. Alcohol poisoning can lead to respiratory arrest.
In the most severe cases, yes. Mr. Petrillo's case wasn't that severe, however.
Well, and just to be clear for the members of the jury, Mr. Petrillo died from respiratory arrest, didn't he?
Correct. He stopped breathing when he was in a coma.
And therefore, it's possible that Mr. Petrillo died from alcohol poisoning.
I don't contend that. I believe the pesticide is what killed him ultimately, not the alcohol.
Now, Dr. Kwan, I know you want to talk about what you believe, but it's a possibility that Mr. Petrillo died from alcohol poisoning, isn't it?
In my conclusions, I have concluded that it was the pesticide that killed him, not the alcohol.
Well, Dr. Kwan, I'm not asking what your conclusions were. I'm asking if it's a possibility that Mr. Petrillo died from alcohol poisoning. And it is, isn't it?
It could be, however, I have done my investigation and have concluded that it was not.
But it's still a possibility, right?
Remotely.
All right. Now let's talk about what you did after you believed that Mr. Petrillo had pesticide poisoning. You administered the poison antidote to Mr. Petrillo.
Yes, I did.
Now, this is the antidote that is supposed to reverse a potential pesticide poisoning. Isn't that true?
It's supposed to revert it if you can catch it in time. Unfortunately, Mr. Petrillo's symptoms were so far advanced, and I caught it too late.
That's right. Even after being given the poison antidote for what you thought was a case of pesticide poisoning, Genesis still died.
Again, I caught it too late. I didn't see the obvious writing on the wall that it was pesticide poisoning earlier, and I missed my window for reversing it. By the time I injected him with the antidote, it was too late.
Now, I want to talk about, before I talk about the things you used to come to your conclusions, I want to talk about something you're a part of. Dr. Kwan, you serve on the board of directors of Doctors for Organic Solutions. Isn't that true?
Yes, ma'am, in my free time away from the emergency room.
And this organization advocates against the use of chemical pesticides.
We're an activist group, yes.
You're even hopeful that this case will convince legislators to outright ban pesticide use. Isn't that true?
Yes, however, I keep my personal life and my professional life separate. As such, I did not put any of that bias into my conclusions today.
Well, Dr. Kwan, a liable verdict in this case can help advance the agenda of the organization you represent.
Merely the fact that Genesis died is evidence of this, not a liable verdict. I'm not here for a liable or not, merely to espouse my conclusions as an unbiased doctor.
Dr. Kwan, you would agree with me that any suspected amount of ingestion of pesticide is potentially deadly.
Correct. Like I said on Direct, even a small dose of this pesticide is highly lethal.
That's right, and that's because you can't determine the specific amount of pesticide ingested.
No, ma'am, it's very hard to determine once it's been metabolized.
That's right, and you don't know if the amount of pesticide in Mr. Petrillo's system was under the allowed limit by the FDA, do you?
I don't know the FDA limits. I simply know that any amount of pesticide could be lethal.
That's right. So if Mr. Petrillo had 0.1 milligrams of pesticide in his system, that would show up as a positive result on your test.
Well, it would show up as being in his system, correct? However, the variation in how high his acetylcholinesterase levels are, that changes.
You concluded that Genesis drank wine contaminated with pesticides.
Yes, ma'am.
But another person also drank some of that wine, right?
I believe, yes. I believe I saw Angel Rodriguez's affidavit that said they had a couple sips.
That's right. And Angel Rodriguez was at the hospital that night, wasn't she?
Yes, ma'am, she was.
But Angel Rodriguez did not present a single symptom of pesticide poisoning, did she?
I wasn't examining Angel. I wouldn't know that.
That's right. You knew that Angel Rodriguez had ingested this wine and you didn't admit her to the hospital.
I actually didn't know she had ingested the wine at the time.
Objection, Your Honor, to speculation.
I think the question's been answered. I don't know that it calls for speculation. So overruled.
Dr. Kwan, regardless of if you knew if Angel Rodriguez ingested that wine, while at the hospital, she never presented any symptoms of pesticide poisoning, did she?
Ma'am, I wasn't treating Miss Angel Rodriguez. I didn't pay attention to her. I was more focused on the dying man in front of me.
Well, that's right, Dr. Kwan. Angel Rodriguez never had to be admitted to the hospital after drinking that wine, did she?
Angel never asked to be admitted, no.
Now, I want to talk about Ms. Petrillo's blood alcohol content levels. You said that Miss Petrillo had a BAC of 0.16, right?
Yes, when the results came back for 0.16, correct.
And that was her BAC when she came into the hospital that night.
That was her BAC when it got tested around 3 a.m.
You don't know what her peak BAC was, his peak BAC was that night.
I don't. However, knowing what I know about alcohol and its metabolization, I can say it most likely wasn't any higher or much higher.
Well, Dr. Kwan, you never even attempted to figure out what that peak BAC would have been, did you?
I didn't need to. I had to focus on the pesticide poison in Mr. Petrillo's blood.
Well, even after Mr. Petrillo died, you still never attempted to find out his peak BAC, did you?
Because the alcohol didn't kill him.
No further questions.
Any other questions from the plaintiff?
No, Your Honor. I just ask that this witness can constructively step down.
You may step down. Thank you. Plaintiff may call its next witness.
Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff would like to call Ms. Sam Arnold to the stand.
Okay. Ms. Arnold has previously been sworn in. You may proceed.
All right. Can you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Hello, I am Sam Arnold.
And what do you do for a living, Ms. Arnold?
I currently work as Rapid River Valley's most prestigious food service provider. After attending many culinary schools in France, I moved here and eventually started my own food catering business.
And why are you here today?
I'm here to tell everyone what I know about the death of Genesis Petrillo and his relationship with Albert Martini, as well as what I saw at the rehearsal dinner. I was a caterer.
Okay, well, we can get into that in just 1 second, but first I'd like to know, who is Genesis Petrillo?
Genesis was the soon-to-be spouse of Casey Soto, the child of Albert Martini. Casey and Genesis were to be married, but unfortunately, Genesis passed away after their wedding rehearsal.
Now, I want to talk about Harper Martini. How do you know her?
I met Albert back in 2016 when our winery, Peony Estates, was celebrating a 20-year anniversary. I was hired to cater the party, and since then, Peony Estates has been one of my largest clients.
I'd like to talk about the relationship between the defendant and Genesis Petrillo. Do you know anything about that?
Unfortunately, I do. When I first met with Albert to discuss plans for the wedding, she made it very clear that she did not like Genesis very much. She would become very verbal when talking about him. And towards the end of our meeting, I even heard her say, anyone but Genesis, literally anyone. But she wasn't looking at me, so I thought it best to leave.
All right, now I'd like to talk about the wedding rehearsal. How did that day start?
I arrived fairly early to Peony Estates. This is on the 7th of June in 2019. I met Albert in the kitchen. I saw her working with several bottles of wine, mostly the 2017 Horizon, which is one of Peony Estates' most popular wines. But I did see a bottle with a unique label that Albert told me was a 2019 Cara, an unreleased Peony Estates wine.
Do you know who that bottle of wine was for?
No, I do. I asked Albert, and she informed me that it was for Genesis. She said he was getting something special, that she hoped would take care of the problems forever.
What did Harper do with the bottle after saying that?
She just asked if I could pass out the bottles of wine later that evening as gifts for Genesis and the wedding party. But she really reiterated that the bottle of Cara had to go to Genesis, while everyone else would receive Horizon.
How did you respond to that?
I told her I'd be happy to help, and then I went to leave the kitchen. But not before I saw a can of pesticide sitting on the counter in the kitchen that I was meant to cook in. I did not like this. I asked her why it was there.
What did Harper say?
She said it was to kill pests like Genesis.
Well, what did you do after leaving the kitchen?
I unfortunately had to run out to my car after I noticed my leaking PPI was at that under season. And I ran into RPR and Genesis in the middle of a heated discussion. I could not tell you what had started this fight, but I did hear Genesis yell, "You think you know what is best for Casey, but you have no idea. How dare you try and break Casey's heart?"
Well, did that argument affect the rehearsal dinner at all?
No, because the dinner went over just fine. My food went over without a hitch, as it should. And then people began their speeches. In my line of work, I am unlucky enough to witness parents, best men, maids of honor often deliver babbling, incoherent speeches. But I am pleased to report that Casey's speech was not a disaster, and April's was okay too.
What did Harper say in her speech?
Well, as she began speaking, that was my cue to bring up the gift ones. And as I presented Genesis with his bottle of Cara, April really emphasized that it was just for Genesis and that he should wait to drink it until he was alone, which I thought was strange.
And why did you find that strange?
Because, in my opinion, as a wine connoisseur, good wine is meant to be shared.
I have no further questions, Your Honor, and at this time, I tender this witness for cross-examination.
All right, defense may proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Miss Arnold. I want to pick up where you left off and talk about some things that you heard Harper Martini say, okay? So you just mentioned hearing Harper say that she hoped that bottle of Cara wine would take care of her problems forever, right?
Sorry, I mean, yes.
Just to be clear, you don't know if Harper meant that that bottle of Cara wine would actually bring her and Genesis closer, right?
Objection, Your Honor, speculation.
Response, Your Honor?
You may respond.
Your Honor, this is cross-examination. If the witness does not know what Harper Martini meant by that statement, then she's free to answer.
I'll overrule the objection.
Once again, Miss Arnold, you don't know if Harper meant that that bottle of Cara wine would actually bring her and Genesis closer, right?
No, I do not know.
You don't know whether or not Harper meant that that bottle would fix the issues between her and Genesis that day, right?
Yeah, besides what she told me, I know nothing about that.
You also said you heard Harper say that pesticides she was using was to kill pests like Genesis, right?
Yes.
But Miss Arnold, you knew that that was a joke.
I suppose she said she was kidding, but I'm not sure what is going on in your head.
Right, you knew it was a joke because she said she was kidding, right?
Like, I know what she told me.
Pass the witness, Your Honor.
Anything else from this witness?
No redirect, Your Honor. I just asked that my witness be allowed to constructively step down.
She may.
Merci.
All right. Anything else from the plaintiff at this time?
Nothing further from the plaintiff, Your Honor. The plaintiff rests its case in chief and asks for a brief 5-minute break, time permitting.
Let's see here. I have down, we'll give you about 4 minutes. How about that?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. I remind all the parties, you guys are still being live streamed on YouTube, so turn off your video and turn off your audio. All right, if everyone can hear me, let's go ahead and get back online.
Yes, Your Honor, the defense is ready to proceed whenever you are.
All right, I think the plaintiff will be on in just a second and then we'll get started. All right, is the plaintiff ready?
Yes, Your Honor. We're ready to proceed.
All right, the defense may call its first witness.
Your Honor, the defense calls Harper Martini to the stand.
Okay. This witness has been previously sworn. You may proceed.
Now, can you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Hi, my name is Harper Martini.
Now, Ms. Martini, I have to start out by asking, did you intentionally poison Genesis Petrillo?
No, I would never do anything to risk the happiness of my only son. Or my only daughter, sorry.
Well, can you tell us a little bit more about your daughter, Casey?
Casey is the light of my life. Ever since she was born, my entire life has revolved around her. You know, I used to always say back in the day that I was a winemaker first, but the only time I ever took a break was to raise my daughter. You know, Peony Estates, it's the best in the Midlands, but I always say that Casey's my number one.
Now, I want the jury to learn a little bit more about your relationship with Genesis Petrillo. When did you guys first meet?
Well, back in 2012, my beautiful, amazing, talented daughter brought Genesis home. I mean, at first I was a little bit nervous. You know, I've met some of Casey's boyfriends from high school. Nobody seemed good enough for her, but I was excited for our family to grow. And, you know, I felt like me and Genesis already had something in common because we both loved Casey so much. But no matter how hard I tried, Genesis never seemed to like me.
Well, did your relationship improve by the time your daughter and Genesis got engaged?
No, it didn't. After dating for about 6 years, Casey told me that her and Genesis were getting married. And as her mom, I was really concerned.
Why were you concerned?
I mean, Genesis was just a terrible influence on my daughter. My Casey is so bright and organized and goal-oriented. But when she met Genesis, all of that changed. Genesis would make Casey say and do things that she had never done before.
Objection, Your Honor, to lack of personal knowledge.
I'm going to sustain the objection at this time. If you want to lay a predicate for that, we can proceed, but it's sustained at this time.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Martini, can you tell us a little bit about how you know of Genesis and Casey and their relationship and how often you saw them?
I mean, Casey was my daughter, but she was also my number one best friend. She still is. And I would try to spend all of my time with her whenever I was not working at Peony Estates. I would spend it with my daughter, and Genesis would be there whenever he could.
Now, can you tell us why you were concerned about your daughter marrying Mr. Petrillo?
Well, I remember one time, it was a little bit after Casey's 24th birthday. Genesis and Casey had this bet that Casey should drink a glass of wine from each of our wine collections. And, you know, Casey, my daughter, she drank too much and she ended up throwing up everywhere and ended up in the hospital from alcohol poisoning. It was really heartbreaking to see and really difficult to go through as a parent. And, you know, Genesis was just a bad influence on my daughter.
Well, did you ever tell your daughter that you were concerned about her marrying Mr. Petrillo?
Of course. Like I said, me and Casey were best friends, so I told her immediately after they were engaged. But she told me that if I didn't find a way to make things work with Genesis, then I couldn't be at the wedding.
Objection, Your Honor, to hearsay as to the statements of Casey Soto.
Sustained.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, can you tell us a little bit more about your involvement in the wedding with Miss Petrillo and Casey?
Well, I knew that I wanted to be a part of my daughter's life, and I knew that if I wanted to be there for her, I had to make peace with my future to-be son-in-law. So I decided to host the wedding at my winery to try and work on my relationship with Genesis.
And were you ever able to make peace with Genesis in the months leading up to the wedding?
I mean, I really, really tried. I would ask Genesis to go to lunch with me, send him memes, constantly text him. And honestly, I thought me and him were making strides in the right direction. But then it turns out I was wrong.
Why do you think you were wrong?
Well, about a month before the wedding, Genesis called me at around 2 a.m. and told me that he was taking Casey and moving to France, and I would never see Casey again or even see my future grandkids.
And how did you respond after Miss Petrillo told you that you'd never see your only daughter again?
To be honest, it wasn't my proudest moment, but I love my daughter a lot and I wanted to be around her as much as possible. So I responded with a note. I gave Genesis a check for $300,000 to leave Midlands and leave my daughter by June 7th.
Did Mr. Petrillo ever cash that check you gave him?
No, he didn't. He actually came and confronted me about it. And he threw the note, crumpled up the note and threw it in my face, and he never cashed that check.
Now, if Mr. Petrillo didn't leave Genesis, what were you going to do?
Well, my plan was to cancel the wedding altogether.
And did you end up canceling the wedding?
No, I didn't.
Why not?
Well, the day before the rehearsal dinner, my daughter and I went out for brunch like we usually do, and we had a much needed talk. Casey, she apologized for Genesis' behavior and how me and Genesis had been getting along. And earlier I remember that if I wanted to be a part of my daughter's life, I would have to be okay with Genesis in it too. And I was afraid that if me and Genesis didn't bury the hatchet, then I would lose my only daughter forever. And nothing in this world is worth losing my daughter. She's all I have.
Did you do anything to try and bury the hatchet with Mr. Petrillo?
Of course. I put my big girl pants on and I decided to get a little bit creative. One of the only things that me and Genesis had in common, other than our love for Casey, was wine. So I decided to give him a bottle of wine I'd been working on. It was a complex blend of fall notes and spices, and I wanted to give him one of the first bottles we ever produced.
And what was the name of that wine that you gave Genesis?
That was a bottle of Cara wine. I knew it was special immediately because Casey was the one who named it.
Now, Miss Martini, did you use pesticides to poison the bottle of Cara wine before giving it to Genesis Petrillo?
No, I didn't. I would never. To be honest, why would I even do that? I care about my business, and if I did that, my daughter would never forgive me. Honestly, I would never be able to forgive myself either.
Your Honor, we pass the witness.
You may proceed.
Cross-examination, Your Honor.
You may.
Now, you love your winery more than almost anything, don't you?
Almost anything, but not my daughter, Casey. She's my number one.
Right. Like you say, the only thing you love more than your winery is your daughter, Casey.
Of course, who wouldn't? She's so talented, beautiful, brilliant. I could go on for days.
In fact, you told Genesis that you would stop at nothing to protect your only child, right?
Yeah, that's why I was considering canceling the wedding.
And you eventually wanted to pass on your winery to Casey one day, right?
Yeah, I thought that she would have been a good fit.
But then Casey met Genesis.
Yes.
And you immediately saw Genesis as a threat to your business.
Not immediately, but then Genesis would keep making comments about our wine, making fun of our food, and that would scare customers away.
So that's yes to my question?
Yes, eventually Genesis became a threat to my business.
Right, and you also thought that Genesis was a bad influence on Casey.
Yes.
And then you found out that they were going to be married.
Yes, I did.
And then in May of 2019, you learned that Mr. Petrillo and Casey were moving to Paris, right?
Yeah, Genesis left me this voicemail at 2 a.m. in the morning. It was crazy.
Right. And you would recognize a transcript of this voicemail if I showed it to you today?
Yes, I would.
At this time, Exhibit 8 should be screen sharing. Now, I'd like you to read along with me. I'm going to Paris after the wedding. You'll never see me again. Congrats. Oh, there's a catch, though. Casey's coming with me. Casey doesn't want you to know, doesn't want to upset fragile little Harper or have you try to stop the wedding. Did I read that correctly?
Yeah, Genesis was really mean to me.
Right. And like you said right now and on direct, this voicemail upset you.
It hurt my feelings. Yeah, I thought me and Genesis were making strides in our relationship, and then I got this voicemail in the middle of the night.
Right. And then after hearing this voicemail, there was nothing you would rather do than to stop the wedding, right?
Yes, that's why I wrote the note, and I wanted to cancel the wedding.
Well, we'll get to the note in just a second. Actually, well, in late May of 2019, the note that you're referring to, you enclosed a check for $300,000 as you stated on direct, right?
Yes,
And you would recognize a copy of this note if I were to show it to you today?
I would.
At this time, Exhibit 24 should be screen sharing. Now, this is the note you wrote Mr. Petrillo, right?
Yes, after I received the voicemail.
And it's a fair and accurate copy?
Yes.
And no changes have been made in any way?
No.
And this is your handwriting on this note?
Yes.
At this time, plaintiff moves Exhibit 24 into evidence.
Any objections?
No objections, Your Honor.
24 is admitted.
Now, in this letter, you told Genesis to take the $300,000 and leave, or you would do things the hard way, right?
Yeah, I was referring to canceling the wedding altogether.
Right, but Genesis didn't leave, did he?
Yeah, like I said, he got mad at me and told me that he was really upset that I would even offer him money to leave my daughter. And honestly, that kind of showed me that he was going to be there for Casey no matter what. And that's the most important thing.
Miss Martini, that's a yes to my question.
I'm sorry. Yes, it is.
Now, I want to talk to you about the wedding rehearsal. Now, on that day, you decided to put a plan you had into action, as you stated on direct, right?
Yeah, I knew that if my daughter was going to be in my life, I had to make amends with Genesis. So I was getting that bottle ready to give it to him.
Right, and that plan consisting of you giving Genesis the bottle of Cara.
Yes.
Now, but on the day of the wedding rehearsal, you brought that bottle of Cara into the kitchen, right?
Yes.
And Sam Arnold was in the kitchen with you.
Yeah, briefly.
And you told Sam that this bottle of Cara was specifically for Genesis, right?
Yeah, because it was a gift.
Right. Now, at 2:30 the next morning, you learned that someone had been rushed to the hospital, right?
Yeah, so one of my employees called me and told me that someone was in the hospital. You know, Genesis, he drinks a lot, so I just assumed that it was him because this wouldn't be the first time that he had been at the hospital.
Right. You immediately suspected Genesis due to poison, right?
Because of alcohol poisoning, which has happened so many times before. Yeah.
Let's talk about the bottle of Cara. Once you learned that someone had been rushed to the hospital, you went up to Genesis's room, right?
Yes, it was on the way to Casey's.
Right. You picked up the bottle of Cara that was on the floor.
It was empty, so I was just going to throw it away, and I put it in the trash can.
Well, but before you threw it away, you ripped off the label.
Yeah, we recycle our labels separately.
Well, but you threw both of them in the same trash can.
Yeah, I was in a hurry, so I must have forgotten.
And you're aware that that bottle later tested positive for organophosphate pesticides, right?
Yeah, there were empty pesticides in the trash can.
That's the same kind of pesticide that you use at Peonia State.
That's the only pesticide that's on Peonia States, yes.
Right, and you knew that mixing pesticides with wine is harmful?
Yeah, every winemaker knows that.
You know that mixing pesticides with wine is odorless?
Yes, it doesn't have any taste or smell either.
Right, pesticide in wine is completely undetectable.
Pretty much, yeah. So we have to be really careful when using our pesticides.
Thank you. I have no further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Hey, anything else from this witness?
Yes, Your Honor, just a quick redirect.
Okay.
Miss Martini, Mr. Caldwell came up here and showed you that note and tried to explain what that meant for you. Can you tell us what you meant specifically by "I will take you out the hard way"?
Yeah, I meant that I was going to cancel the wedding the night of the rehearsal dinner. I knew that wouldn't make Genesis happy, and Casey would be really upset, and it would be hard for everyone.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Okay. Plaintiff have any recross?
No, Your Honor.
Okay.
Your Honor, we just ask that Miss Martini be excused and we can continue calling our next witnesses.
All right. You are excused and you may call your next witness.
The defense calls Austin Lewis to the stand.
This witness has been previously sworn. You may proceed.
Good afternoon. Can you introduce yourself to the court?
Of course. Howdy, y'all. My name is Austin Lewis. It is really great to be here with y'all this afternoon.
What do you do for a living, Miss Lewis?
Well, I'm the chief winemaker at the Peony Estates. You know, my mama was a winemaker. My mom's mama was a winemaker. And my mom, she used to always say, I don't just make wine for a living. I live to make wine. And that's how I feel too.
Do you know the owner of Peony Estates, Harper Martini?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
What's your relationship like with Miss Martini?
Well, Harper and I became friends, close friends, like family, when we used to work at this old winery together. A few years ago, Harper opened her own winery and brought me on as chief winemaker. I was more excited than my dog when she gets a big old ribeye bone.
Can you tell the jury what your duties are as the chief winemaker?
Well, of course, I'm the heart and the soul of the winery. I oversee the growing, harvesting, fermentation, aging, and bottling. You know, I've wanted that job since I was a little girl.
Miss Lewis, will you tell us a little bit about Peony Estates itself?
Of course. Some people brag about their grandkids. I brag about Peony Estates, the boutique winery in all of Midlands. We're right next to a swamp, which is a little interesting.
Miss Lewis, does Peony Estates' location present any unique challenges to you?
Yes, ma'am. There's a lot of pests who want to eat our grapes. I mean, I don't blame them. They're the best grapes in all of Midlands. But those little critters threatened our wine production, so we started using pesticides.
Well, did you do anything to make sure that the pesticides were handled properly at Peony Estates?
Yes, ma'am. We provided annual employee training, and Peony Estates is located on a hill, right? So there's areas in the vineyard that have bad drainage, and this drainage can cause pesticide buildup. So each year I dispose of the grapes in these areas with bad drainage just to make sure that no wine is made using bad grapes.
Well, Miss Lewis, is it even safe to have pesticides in wine?
Yes, ma'am, it is. People don't realize that pesticide is in almost everything. Our fruits, our pecan pies, and our wine. Our wine is actually tested by a federal health inspector.
When that health inspector tested the wine on your property, did he ever document the pesticide levels in your wine?
Yes, ma'am. He provided us with the lab testing results from the pesticide tests.
Now, would you recognize the lab report results if I were to show them to you?
Yes, ma'am, I would.
Objection, Your Honor. Pursuant to the pretrial matters, according to Business Law 12100, this is a battery trial. This is not, we are not allowed to discuss the use of pesticides in the Peony Estates or the misuse or the keeping of the pesticides of the Peony Estates.
May I have a response, Your Honor?
Yes, what's the relevance of this report?
Your Honor, it's plaintiff's contention in today's case that Miss Martini poisoned the bottle of Cara wine. Your Honor, we're using this testimony and these lab report results to show that Peony Estates' wine did have pesticides in it, but these pesticides were under the legal amount. And as you heard in the cross-examination and direct of Dr. Kwan can only tell you that there was pesticides present in Mr. Petrillo's system, not how much pesticides. So this goes to make the fact more likely that it was actually alcohol poisoning that caused Mr. Petrillo's death and not pesticide poisoning.
Your Honor, may I be heard?
You may.
We raised this in pretrial matters. We brought this up. Opposing counsel had no objection to this, Your Honor. And because of that, we are still holding everyone to that standard in trial today. We are not allowed to discuss the keeping, the use, the misuse of pesticides at the Peony Estates in trial today.
May I have a response, Your Honor?
Well, this is, and I don't know which report you're referring to, but the report is it related to the amount of pesticide found within the wines?
Yes, Your Honor. And further, opposing counsel is correct. Plaintiff is not allowed to reference the storage, the use of pesticides. However, defense is not limited to discuss that. Your Honor, we are allowed to discuss this. It says, however, evidence of Peony Estates' pesticide usage and or storage may be admitted by either party if such evidence is relevant to other issues, such as intent and or causation. And Your Honor,
I'm going to go ahead and overrule the objection.
Yes, Your Honor. All right, Ms. Lewis, would you recognize those lab report results if I were to show them to you?
Yes, ma'am, I would.
Your Honor, I'm putting up on the screen the lab report results, Exhibit 9. Now, Ms. Lewis, can you tell us what we're looking at here?
This is the lab report results from when the health inspector tested the wines at Peony Estates.
Now, can you explain to the jury what isofenfos is?
Objection, Your Honor. Improper expert opinion.
May I have a response, Your Honor?
You may. Go ahead.
First of all, Ms. Lewis is not an expert, so we're not offering an expert opinion. But further, Ms. Lewis is allowed to talk about isofenfos pesticide, as that's the type of pesticide used at Peony Estates. And opposing counsel can bring this up on cross if she wants to question Ms. Lewis's ability to discuss this.
Well,
Your Honor, may I be heard?
I'm going to overrule the objection if you'll lay a predicate as to what her knowledge is and how she knows that.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Lewis, how do you know what isofenfos is?
Yes, ma'am. It's the kind of pesticide we used at Peony Estates. I've worked with it for a long time.
Would you say you're familiar with it?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Now, can you explain to the jury what isofenfos is?
Sure. There's plenty of different types of pesticides, but isofenfos is just the fancy term that city folk use to describe the pesticide that we use at Peony Estates.
Now, what does the next column, results, indicate?
The result column shows how much isofenfos pesticide was found in the wine at Peony Estates.
Now, I want to make something clear for the jury. Are you allowed to have pesticide in your wine?
Yes, ma'am. There are certain levels of pesticide that the FDA allows to be in your wine. If you look at the next column, report and limit, that's the amount of pesticides that the FDA allows.
Did the wine at Peony Estates exceed the reporting limit of isofenfos pesticides as allowed by the FDA?
No, ma'am. The reporting limit was 50, and our wine scored a cool 45. We were under the allowed amount of pesticide. It was safe.
Now let's specifically discuss the bottle of wine in contention here today. A 2019 bottle of Cara wine. Are you familiar with it?
Yes, ma'am. It was given to Genesis Petrillo on the night of his dinner rehearsal.
Now, did that Cara bottle of wine have pesticides in it?
Well, yes. All wine bottles have a small amount of pesticides in them. That's pretty normal. All of our wine contains far under the allowed amount of pesticides, though.
Now, I want to talk about your relationship with Harper. How long have you known Harper?
Oh, Lord, too many years to count. When she gave me a great job at Peony Estates, I was grinning like a possum eating a sweet tater.
Would you say you knew Miss Martini well?
Yes, ma'am. We worked together all the time and stayed really busy.
Did you know Genesis Petrillo?
Not well. I only knew him because of Casey and Harper.
And how would you describe the relationship between Genesis and Harper?
They sure did not like each other like my mama and Aunt Lucinda. I mean, Harper ran her mouth off forever about how Genesis was not good enough for her daughter.
Miss Lewis, did you ever see Harper poison the wine given to Genesis on June 7th, 2019?
No, ma'am. I never even saw her touch the wine that day. After all the years I've known her, or known Harper, Casey was what made Harper the happiest. I don't think she would ever do anything to hurt that relationship.
No further questions.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. All right, Miss Lewis, I would like to talk a little bit about why you're here today. To start off, you'd agree with me that you currently own 10% of the Peony estates.
Yes, ma'am, I do. I've worked very hard for that.
And you would agree with me that if Harper were to lose this lawsuit, the winery will also likely shut down.
Right, that's true.
Because no one will want to do business with a winery whose owner intentionally poisoned someone with the winery's wine.
I mean, yeah, that's true. People could think that.
And so you would be out of a job.
Right.
And you would also be out a lot of money.
Right. I do own a lot of the business. I worked hard for it.
So, Miss Lewis, you would agree with me that losing the Peony Estates is the last thing you would want to happen.
Right. I mean, it's my heart and soul.
Alrighty. Now, you'd agree with me, Miss Lewis, that Harper Martini is familiar with pesticide use at the winery.
Yes, we use it at the winery.
And she knew where the pesticide was stored.
I would think that she knew.
And Harper even told you that she knew pesticide could be poisonous.
Right, in unsafe amounts. Yes, ma'am.
Even more so, she said she knew pesticide could be fatal.
Right, that's why we had to monitor the amounts we use on our crops.
In fact, Harper's the one that told you that the employee who had a drink of a glass of contaminated wine in 2018.
Right.
And she told you that the employee had gotten very sick.
Right, that's true.
And almost died.
Right.
In fact, Harper even mentioned that you couldn't tell from looking at the glass that pesticide was mixed in.
Objection, Your Honor. Under Rule 801, this is hearsay within hearsay.
Response?
Your Honor, no specific statements have been elicited. This is not hearsay.
May I have a response, Your Honor?
Well, was the statement that you can't even tell it's in the glass, was that not a specific statement, or is that just a generalization?
That was the generalization, Your Honor.
I'm going to overrule the objection. You can proceed.
Yes, Your Honor.
Would you like me to re-ask the question, Miss Lewis?
Yes, ma'am, that would be great.
In fact, Harper even mentioned that you couldn't tell from looking at the glass that pesticide was mixed in.
Right.
And Harper even went on to say that you couldn't smell the pesticide in the wine either.
No, ma'am. Or yes, she did say that.
Objection, Your Honor. This is hearsay under Rule 801.
Response?
Your Honor, the witness has already answered the question. I'm about to move on.
All right, let's move on.
Now, Miss Lewis, you are aware that the bottle of Cara wine was found to be contaminated with pesticides.
Right, but all wines contain pesticides.
And you would agree with me that you've supervised every spraying the Peony Estates has done.
Right, yeah.
And you are not aware of a single occasion that any of your pesticide containers leaked or spilled.
Right.
And the health and safety inspector even tested the Peony Estates wine.
Yes, ma'am, he did.
And you do provide your employees with mandatory annual training on proper use and storage of the pesticides.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Your Honor, at this time, I have nothing further for this witness.
Anything else from the defense?
No redirect, Your Honor. I just ask that Ms. Lewis be excused.
You may be excused, Ms. Lewis. Defense have any more witnesses?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Dr. Reagan Cannon to the stand.
All right. And
Good
Dr. Cannon has been previously sworn for the record. You may proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Dr. Cannon. Could you introduce yourselves to the jury?
Good afternoon. I am Dr. Reagan Cannon.
Can you tell us what you do for a living?
I'm currently an associate consultant at Gardner Consulting, but for most of my life, I've actually been working in the field of toxicology.
How are you qualified to work in the field of toxicology?
Well, I graduated from Harvard Medical School with an emphasis in toxicology. I then worked at the Massachusetts General Hospital as the director of toxicology, and then I began teaching. And I was a professor at Midlands Medical School for 9 years, where I taught classes, both academic and clinical, in toxicology.
Can you also tell us how you are involved in today's case?
I assessed the findings of Dr. Kwan, the ER doctor who treated Genesis Petrillo on the night of her death. I specifically analyzed Genesis Petrillo's cause of death, and I disagree with some of Dr. Kwan's conclusions about the cause of death.
All right, doctor, so before we get into some of your disagreements with Dr. Kwan, I want to walk the jury through exactly how you conducted your analysis. So what kind of method do you typically use?
I use a 3-part method. It's the RAC method, and it stands for review, analysis, and conclusion.
Did you use your RAC method in today's case?
I did, yes.
Doctor, is that method reliable?
It is. It's peer-reviewed, and it's the standard for medical consultants all around the world.
And what kind of materials do you need to perform your method?
Well, in this case, I looked at all the same documents that Dr. Kwan did. That included Genesis Petrillo's toxicology report, his death certificate, along with the affidavit of an eyewitness who was with Genesis Petrillo on the night of his death.
And all those materials that you just mentioned, did you have those available for you today?
Yes, and they were sufficient for me to come to a conclusion in today's case.
And did you apply your RAC method to this case, the same as you would to any other?
Yes, I did.
All right, doctor. Now, earlier you mentioned that you disagreed with some of Dr. Kwan's conclusions on Genesis Petrillo's cause of death. So what exactly did you disagree with?
Well, Dr. Kwan concluded that Genesis Petrillo died due to pesticide poisoning alone. However, after I reviewed the affidavit, the documents, the lab report, the test results, it became clear to me that the cause of death wasn't that simple.
What do you mean the cause of death wasn't as simple as just pesticide poisoning?
Well, I concluded that Genesis Petrillo actually died due to a combination of alcohol poisoning and traces of pesticide.
All right, doctor, so let's break that down for the jury. So why did you conclude that her cause of death was a combination of alcohol poisoning and pesticides?
Well, on the night of his death, Genesis Petrillo drank an excessive amount of alcohol. And we found that that excessive amount of alcohol actually reacted with the traces of pesticide that was in his body. And it was that reaction, that combination, that led to Genesis Petrillo's death.
So how was it that you determined that Genesis drank an excessive amount of alcohol before he died?
We found that Genesis Petrillo drank several cocktails, multiple glasses of wine, multiple shots of tequila. So this is quite a bit of alcohol to consume for anyone in such a short period of time.
So were you ever able to measure just how much alcohol he drank that night?
Well, Dr. Kwan did measure Genesis Petrillo's BAC, or blood alcohol concentration, to be 0.16%. However, because Dr. Kwan only measured that BAC 3 hours after Genesis Petrillo had finished consuming the alcohol, that BAC is not the correct peak blood alcohol concentration.
Well, why is his peak BAC important?
Well, it's the only BAC that really matters in a case like this, and I actually brought along a demonstrative to show why that's the case.
Your Honor, permission to show the jury Dr. Cannon's demonstrative?
You may.
Yes, Yes, Your Honor. Could you see that all right, Your Honor?
Yes, I can.
All right, perfect. So Dr. Cannon, I have your demonstrative up here. Can you start by telling us what we're looking at?
Sure. Well, this is a graph depicting Genesis Petrio's projected blood alcohol concentration levels on the night of his death based on empirical evidence.
So looking at this graph, can you continue explaining why Genesis's peak BAC is so important?
Well, as you can see, the peak BAC would have occurred around 12 a.m. That's when Genesis Petrio was drinking the tequila, the wine, the cocktails. So that peak BAC, as you can see, would have reached a level of around 0.30.
Objection, Your Honor. To improper expert opinion under lack of foundation, may I be heard?
You may be heard.
Oh. We have not heard any foundation laid of what formula or what method this witness used to come up with this specific graph. And if they cannot lay this foundation, this is an improper opinion under 702.
I agree. Why don't we, at this time, I'm going to sustain the objection until a proper foundation can be laid.
Yes, Your Honor.
So, Dr. Cannon, I actually have a quick question for you. So, how was it that you came to this conclusion in the graph?
Well, blood alcohol concentration generally peaks from half an hour to an hour after the individual finishes consuming the alcohol. Now, I received a record of the number of drinks that Genesis Petrio had, along with the approximate times at which he drank them based on the affidavit of the eyewitness. Based on all of those materials, that empirical evidence, I was able to use that to construct an approximate graph of Genesis Petrio's projected BAC levels.
So whenever you made this graph, were you using your RAC method?
I was, yes.
All right, doctor. So can you explain where 0.16% BAC came from?
Well, on this graph, it's indicated approximately by the star.
I'd like to re-raise my objection to improper expert opinion. May I be heard?
You may.
Under case law, Kane Software Company v. Mars Investigations, experts are strictly prohibited from testifying on direct examination about any opinions or conclusions not stated in their report. And this graph was not stated in the report, and as was the formula and the methods used to make this graph were also not stated, and therefore this is still an improper expert opinion as the correct foundation has still not been laid.
May I actually respond, Your Honor?
You may, please.
Your Honor, I actually want to take this objection in part. So, first of all, Your Honor, under Rule 1006, an expert is able to summarize their testimony in the form of a graph, chart, or any other thing to summarize their testimony. And that's exactly what Dr. Cannon did today. She took her conclusions in her report and put it and made it into a graph just so the jury can better understand what her conclusions were. Furthermore, Your Honor, under Rule 703, experts are allowed to testify to otherwise unadmissible evidence as long as it aided their conclusion in today's case. And
I don't think the problem is necessarily the descriptive portion of the conclusions. I think the objection is to the basis. For example, where are these numbers coming from? The number of drinks, over what period of time, what was eaten, or what was, I think the word's eaten or ate, what the person ate for dinner, when was the last drink. All of those go into the foundation to come up with these numbers. And then you have to provide the formula with how much alcohol, and each drink contains liquor contains a different amount of alcohol than beer and wine. And that information hasn't been provided. You can't equate one glass of wine to one shot of tequila necessarily unless you know for a fact that those are the same.
May I actually respond to that, Your Honor?
Yes, if you have that foundational information, I think that would make this proper.
Absolutely. So to also take that objection in part, I believe that this goes more to the weight, not the admissibility of this testimony, and as well as this demonstrative, just based on Rule 705 for disclosing the facts or data of an expert's opinion. So as she did today, Dr. Cannon is able to state an opinion and give reasons for it without first testifying to the underlying facts and data. So if opposing counsel wants to take this up on cross-examination, she may, but all the numbers and the values that are included in this chart were included in Dr. Cannon's report as well.
So the report contains all the information contained on the chart?
Yes, Your Honor. So the report.
I'm
yes.
sorry.
Sorry about that. So yes, the report does contain some of the information that Dr. Cannon put in her report. So as I mentioned before, if opposing counsel would like to take that up on cross-examination, she may.
Your Honor,
So does the report contain, I don't have the report in front of me, that's why I'm asking these questions. Does the report contain a conclusion that at midnight the blood alcohol was 0.32?
No, Your Honor.
No, Your Honor. So that specific part of the conclusion that Dr. Cannon was making is not included in her report, but rather included in an affidavit of an eyewitness that Dr. Cannon reviewed in this case.
That the blood alcohol content was 0.32? That's
Yes,
in a different.
as she mentioned on direct examination, based on empirical evidence that she used, that's how those values came to be.
Your Honor, may I be heard on those grounds?
You may.
In Dr. Cannon's report, there is no mention of a specific formula or a specific method used to come up with the conclusion that Mr. Petrillo's BAC had ever even approached 0.30%. And because there is no foundation for any of these formulas or functions, it cannot be stated as fact in this case, and therefore it is still not properly laid as foundation and is still an improper expert opinion to show this as fact to the jury.
My understanding is there's a blood alcohol report that shows 0.16 at a particular time.
Yes, Your
3
Honor.
o'clock. So what is the formula that was used to go backwards?
There is none stated in the report, Your Honor.
Well, if the doctor can provide that information, I think you can make this admissible, but otherwise it's not. I don't understand how it's admissible. That number could be 0.40, 0.50, 0.10. If the doctor just says, I think so, what is that value of that to the jury without understanding how the doctor got those numbers?
Yes, Your Honor, and that's exactly the point that I was making before, was that Dr. Kwan, all these things that are on this graph right now, some of them are included in Dr. Cannon's report. So if opposing counsel would like to cross-examine Dr. Cannon and see if those things are actually contained in her report, then she may do that.
Well, then I think the proper way to handle this would be to take the witness on voir dire or voir dire rather than introduce highly prejudicial information in front of a jury without having any validation for that information. So if the plaintiff wants to take this witness outside of the presence of the jury on voir dire or voir dire to question the results and how this graph came about, I'll allow the plaintiff to do that briefly to determine the validity of that graph.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Dr. Cannon, you made a report in preparation for today's trial, correct?
It's correct.
And in this report, you were supposed to include all relevant and pertinent information.
That's correct.
And nowhere in this report did you discuss a specific method used to come to the conclusion that Genesis's blood alcohol level was ever approaching 0.30%.
Like I said, I had to rely on empirical evidence in order to reach that BAC. So there's no formula that I added in this specific report, but I stated the empirical evidence that I received to reach this level of BAC.
So there was no formula you used to come to
in the report, there's none.
And there's no specific method that you used to come to the conclusion.
I would disagree with that. I did use the review analysis conclusion method along with the usage of the empirical evidence to reach this conclusion.
And you agree that Genesis' blood alcohol level was never approaching 0.30%.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
You would agree that there's no evidence that Genesis' blood alcohol level was ever approaching 0.30%.
Like I said, there was no scientific basis for that number. However, when we're not given a scientific basis or affirmative evidence, toxicologists are forced to get into the empirical evidence to see if the facts allow for a conclusion to be reached.
So you would agree with me that there is no scientific basis for this chart?
That's correct.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right. I think I've heard enough. I'm not going to allow the jury to review this chart. It's not. I don't find that it's helpful, as demonstrative evidence if there's no scientific basis for it.
Absolutely, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
So now, can you talk a little bit more about how you believe pesticides also played a part in Genesis's death, Dr. Kennan?
Sure. So like Dr. Kwan concluded, there was pesticide found in Genesis Petrio's body. But at the same time, it's not possible to tell how much pesticide was actually in Genesis Petrio's body.
So, and why does it matter how much pesticide is found in his body?
Well, essentially, there could have been just traces of pesticide in his body, and no one would be able to tell. It's common knowledge among toxicologists that there's pesticide in almost everything that we consume, eat, or drink. So the traces of pesticide that could have been in Genesis Petrio's body could have come from anything that he consumed.
All right, now I want to be clear for the jury, Dr. Kennan. Do you believe that it is more likely than not that pesticide alone caused the death of Genesis Petrio?
No. I did not conclude and was not able to conclude that pesticide poisoning was more likely than not the cause of Genesis Petrio's death.
Thank you, Doctor. Your Honor, repass the witness.
All right.
Your Honor, may I proceed?
You may.
Dr. Cannon, before we get to some specifics of the case, I just want to go over a few things.
Sure.
You currently work as an associate consultant for Gardner Consulting Incorporated.
That's correct.
You have testified in over 30 legal cases.
That's correct.
Every time you've testified for the side of the defense.
That's correct.
In fact, one of Gardner Consulting's biggest clients is Detsky Roach and Rodent Kill.
That's right.
This is a company that makes chemical pesticides.
That's right.
In fact, in order to continue your business with them, it is extremely important that a pesticide not be found responsible for Mr. Petrillo's death today.
The CEO reached out to me, and he did say that. However, I would like to note that that had no effect on my conclusions in today's case.
But that is a yes to my question, that it is extremely important that pesticide not be found responsible today.
That's what the CEO said.
Well, in fact, you, Dr. Cannon, don't want to lose Detsky as a client.
That's correct. We don't want to lose any business as a general rule.
Because your consulting firm would lose out on a lot of money if that happened.
That's correct.
Now that we've been over that, I want to talk to you a little bit more about your preparation for this case. Your sources of information in this case were limited to only documents.
That's right.
You never saw Genesis himself.
No, as a consultant, my job usually isn't to examine the patient's body themselves.
Correct. You never treated Genesis at the hospital.
No.
You never had a conversation with Mr. Petrillo.
That's correct.
Nonetheless, you felt this was sufficient and continued on.
As a medical consultant, my job is to review all of the documents, and that's what my job is.
I want to be clear about something, Dr. Cannon. You agree that the facts in this case are consistent with Mr. Petrillo's death being caused by consuming wine containing an organophosphate pesticide, correct?
That's correct.
And you did make alternate theories.
That's right.
One of those alternate theories you made is you state that we cannot rule out the possibility that Mr. Petrillo suffered from alcohol poisoning.
That's exactly correct.
As you discussed on your direct, you're aware that when it was tested, Genesis's blood alcohol level was 0.16%.
That's correct. 3 hours after Genesis Petrillo finished consuming the alcohol, the BAC was measured to be 0.016%.
We'll get to the changing of the BAC in a moment, Dr. Cannon, but first, you would agree with me that it is extremely unlikely that a blood alcohol level of 0.16% would lead to death.
That's right, and I've never seen a case where 0.16 has led to a death.
But as you stated, blood alcohol levels can change.
Exactly right.
Genesis's level could have been on a downward spiral.
Exactly.
But you admit that even if Mr. Petrillo's levels had declined, for the alcohol to be fatal, the blood alcohol level would have had to been over that 0.30%.
That's right. After the 0.3% of BAC, that's generally what toxicologists call the danger zone, because after that point, the consequences can be fatal.
In fact, you've never even seen an alcohol poisoning case with a fatality connected with a BAC of lower than that 0.30%.
That's exactly correct.
You would agree with me that there is no affirmative evidence that Genesis's blood alcohol level was ever even approaching 0.30%.
That's exactly right. And that's why I had to look at the empirical evidence.
And you would agree with me, as you stated, that there's no scientific basis that would support a conclusion that Mr. Petrillo's blood alcohol level was ever even approaching that 0.30%.
That's right. Just to clarify, the reason why there is no scientific basis is because Dr. Kwan and no doctor was able to examine Genesis Petrio's body until much later in the night. If he was examined earlier on, we probably would have some sort of scientific basis.
Well, Dr. Cannon, even more so, you admit that if Mr. Petrillo did have alcohol poisoning, it doesn't explain the pesticides found in his stomach.
That's right, and I did not conclude that it was alcohol poisoning alone that caused Genesis Petrio's death.
Even if Genesis did have alcohol poisoning, it does not include the pesticides found in Genesis's blood work.
That's right, there was pesticide in his blood.
You would agree with me that alcohol poisoning does not explain the constricted pupils that Mr. Petrillo exhibited.
That's correct.
You'd agree with me that alcohol poisoning does not explain Mr. Petrillo's abnormally low acetylcholinesterase levels.
That's correct. There was pesticide in his body, and when there's pesticide, acetylcholinesterase levels do go down.
So you would actually admit, Dr. Kinnan, that it is highly unlikely that Mr. Petrillo died because of the alcohol and not the organophosphate pesticide.
That is correct.
Now, you would agree with me that respiratory arrest is the most likely cause of Mr. Petrillo's death.
That's right.
You would agree with me that the organophosphate pesticide poisoning is the most likely cause of Mr. Petrillo's respiratory arrest.
That is correct.
You would also agree with me that the wine produced by Harper Martini is the most likely cause of the organophosphate pesticide poisoning.
That's correct. The wine was the only identifiable source of food type that we found in her stomach. There was other food, but it was churning around with acids essentially, so we couldn't identify the other food that was in his body.
That is a yes to my question. You would agree with me the wine produced by Harper Martini is the most likely cause.
That is correct.
Thank you, Dr. Cannon. I have no further questions at this time.
Anything else for this witness?
Yes, Your Honor, I just have a quick redirect.
Okay.
Dr. Cannon, can you explain how you determined that Genesis's BAC was near 0.3, may have been near 0.3?
Your Honor, objection. Based on your previous ruling, we have already discovered that this is an inaccurate statement. There was no formula or basis to offer this evidence.
That's overruled if they're going to provide a basis or a formula. And at this time, the objection was still sustained from before. But I said, if they can provide a formula or basis for that number, then I would consider it.
Yes, Your Honor.
Oh, Dr. Cannon, can you explain to the jury how you determined that Genesis's BAC may have approached 0.3?
Sure. So when you're determining BAC, you generally, for a man, you multiply 10 times the number of drinks that they have, minus 7.5 times the number of hours that have passed, divided by the mass of the witness, in this case, of the patient, Genesis Petrillo, times 6.8. It gets a little bit complicated, but essentially that is the formula that we use when determining BAC, and that's how you reach whatever BAC you reach, such as 0.30, if you know the number of drinks they have, the time that has passed between drinking those drinks, and the mass of the witness. That's how you reach a BAC.
Thank you, Doctor. Pass the witness, Your Honor.
Anything else from the plaintiff? Recross?
Yes, Your Honor. Brief recross. Now, Dr. Cannon, as you stated earlier, you wrote a report in today's case.
That is correct.
You're aware that you had up until the time of trial to include any relevant information?
That's correct.
And we should be screen sharing the report in just a moment. And that is constructively, once it gets shared, your signature on the bottom of the report?
Constructively, yes.
Sorry, just a moment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, sorry.
No problem.
Dr. Cannon, can you direct me to the lines in this report where you included that formula?
Like I said earlier on in my first direct examination, there was no specific formula listed in this. I did talk about the number of drinks that Genesis Petrillo consumed, the times at which he drank them, and the mass of the witness, which was, or not the mass of the witness, the times at which he drank them and the drinks. If you could scroll down slightly. When I say I read the affidavit of Angel Rodriguez, in the affidavit of Angel Rodriguez, it's detailed what drinks Genesis Petrillo consumed, along with the times at which Genesis Petrillo consumed those drinks.
So again, Dr. Cannon, there is no place in this report where that is included.
I'm sorry, Your Honor, I do believe that plaintiff is out of time.
I think the parties are out of time. I just saw that notice. I'm sorry, I missed it earlier.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right.
I have no further questions for Dr. Cannon, Your Honor. I just ask.
Okay. And the defense rests?
Yes, Your Honor. We now rest our case in chief, and we just ask for a brief 5-minute recess before we head into the closing arguments.
All right, I'll give you 4 minutes.
Understood, Your Honor.
All right. Don't forget, you're on YouTube Live, so cut your video and your audio.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, folks, let's get back. Hopefully everyone noticed the note from the scoring judge, Ms. Voth. If the plaintiffs could put their names on so we can see who they are, not just their character names. All right, are we ready to proceed? Is the plaintiff ready?
Yes, Your Honor.
And the defense is ready?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, plaintiff, you may proceed with your opening of closing.
Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury, may it please the court. A desperate plan gone too far. Now, at the beginning of today's trial, my co-counsel, Ms. Turner, stood before you today and told you we're the plaintiff in today's case. And that means that we hold the burden of proof. And we had to prove two things to you today. One, that the defendant intentionally poisoned a bottle of Cara wine with the intention to cause Mr. Petrillo harm. And two, that the pesticides found in that wine were the direct and proximate cause of Mr. Petrillo's death. Now, our burden of proof today was more likely than not. And that simply means that if you're 50.001% sure that the defendant poisoned that wine, that's enough. That's liable in the state of Midlands. Let's talk about the defendant poisoning wine. Now, you heard from both Angel Rodriguez, a member of the wedding party, and Sam Arnold, the caterer for the event, that the defendant was seen carrying a can of pesticides towards the kitchen that day, after making snide remarks like the pesticides are meant for Genesis. The defendant took that can into the kitchen where, conveniently, wedding gifts were being arranged. Wedding gifts comprised of bottles of wine. And every single person at the wedding rehearsal received the same exact bottle of Horizon wine. Except for one. There was one bottle of Cara that, as the defendant admitted herself, was only for Genesis. Only for Genesis to drink and only for Genesis to pour. Angel would later see Mr. Petrillo drink several glasses of wine from this bottle of Cara and immediately show symptoms of slurred speech, lack of coordination, and profuse sweating. Now, Mr. Petrillo's symptoms, they didn't get better as the night went on. They worsened until Mr. Petrillo passed out in his room and had to be rushed to the hospital. And what was the defendant doing while Mr. Petrillo was fighting for his life in the hospital? Well, she went up to Mr. Petrillo's room, saw the empty bottle of Cara on the floor, tore off the label, and threw them both in the trash. That bottle would later test positive for the same organophosphate pesticides that were found in Mr. Petrillo's stomach contents, in the wine, and in Mr. Petrillo's blood. We know that the wine was poisoned, but why would the defendant poison her own wine? Well, you heard today from every witness that was around the defendant and Mr. Petrillo that their relationship was not good, and that is putting it lightly. The defendant constantly made plans to get rid of Mr. Petrillo and made jokes about harming him. Constantly. Now, their relationship reached a boiling point once Mr. Petrillo sent the defendant a voicemail entailing that Mr. Petrillo and Casey were moving to Paris and that the defendant was never going to see them again and that they didn't want anything to do with the defendant. Now, as the defendant admitted herself, that made her very upset. And again, as the defendant admitted herself, that's when she put her plan into action. Now, her first course of action was to write a check for $300,000 enclosed in a note telling Mr. Petrillo that if he doesn't leave, she'll take him out the hard way. Now, the defendant said the hard way was to cancel the wedding. And we agree. The defendant did want to cancel the wedding. But when this note didn't work, she put her other plan into action. A desperate plan that went too far. Now, the defendant took that can of pesticides into the kitchen where she was seen by Sam Arnold, mixed some of it into the Cara wine, and gave it to Mr. Petrillo. Now, it is not our contention today that the defendant wanted to kill Mr. Petrillo, but it is our contention that the defendant wanted to make Mr. Petrillo sick and harm him, as she put it herself, to cancel the wedding and to get some time back with the daughter and to get rid of her son-in-law that she hated so much. Now, members of the jury, I know that battery might sound like someone punching someone else in the face or assault of other kind, but the moment that the defendant poisoned that wine and the second that that wine touched Mr. Petrillo's lips, that is battery in the state of Midlands. Now, we also had to prove to you that the pesticides found in this wine were the direct cause of Mr. Petrillo's death. And Dr. Kwan stood before you today and told you for certain that these pesticides are what caused Mr. Petrillo to fall into a coma and die. Mr. Petrillo's blood, stomach contents were all found to be tested positive with organophosphate pesticides. Now, what did the defense's expert tell you today? Nothing, really. She said, as I quote, that there is no scientific basis that Mr. Petrillo's blood alcohol content was even nearing lethal levels. The pesticide in that car wine is what killed Mr. Petrillo. Now, I know that you'll go into the deliberation room and find the only verdict that the evidence supports, and that's liable for battery, because the defendant had a plan, a desperate plan that went too far. Thank you.
You may proceed with the defense.
Yes, Your Honor. And may it please the court. Not every story has a villain. Today, the plaintiff told you a story. It was a pretty interesting one. But after listening to Mr. Caldwell's summation of the evidence, I think it's important to take a step back and think about what exactly the plaintiff is asking you to believe. That a woman who owns one of the best wineries in the country would intentionally poison someone at her own winery next to her friends and her family? That a woman whose only daughter, whose only family was her daughter, would intentionally poison a bottle of wine that she could so easily drink? That Miss Martini would intentionally risk losing the two things that she values most in this world? Now, members of the jury, when you take a closer look, you see that the plaintiff is desperate to have a plan. They want to tell you exactly what Miss Martini meant, but they can't. When you see the evidence they brought you, the holes in their story, they start to line up and shed light on the truth. You see, they're telling you the wrong story. This isn't a fairy tale. There's no evil stepmother or mother-in-law. There's no poisoned apple. Miss Martini is not a villain in today's case. Sometimes a tragedy is just a tragedy. Now, throughout today's trial, you got to learn a little bit about the relationship between Miss Martini and Genesis Petrillo. You learned that it certainly wasn't an easy one. They bickered, they argued, they said some pretty cruel things to one another. Mr. Caldwell can't come up here and tell you that they didn't get along, find Harper Martini liable. No, the plaintiff has to meet the elements in the claim that they're bringing to you today. Today, they're bringing a claim of battery, which means that there are three elements that they have to prove to you. The first element that they have to prove to you is that this was an act done by Harper Martini. But if you look at the witnesses that the plaintiff brought you, there's not a single witness who saw Miss Martini pour pesticides in the wine. When Mr. Caldwell got up here a second ago, the only thing he told you about his witnesses is that they saw Miss Martini carrying a can of pesticides. Now, the plaintiff hasn't even bothered to offer an explanation to how Miss Martini actually poisoned this bottle of wine. You heard that this bottle of wine was sealed and corked when it was given to Miss Petrillo. It was sealed and corked when Miss Martini was working on it. You heard that Sam Arnold was actually in the kitchen with Miss Martini when she was working with this bottle of pure wine. He never saw any pesticides being poured into it. Sam Arnold didn't see Harper Martini intentionally poison Genesis Petrillo. Now, the second element that they had to prove to you was that Miss Martini intended to cause harmful contact to Mr. Petrillo. And the main way they did this was by showing you a note. But Mr. Caldwell got up here and he twisted the words of Miss Martini to fit his own story. He tried to say what the words meant by taking you out the hard way. But you heard from Miss Martini herself. She told you that she was going to cancel the wedding. When Mr. Caldwell got up here a second ago, he said that there was another plan after this. But what evidence has he brought you to support that there was another plan after this note? You heard that this note was an isolated incident from Miss Martini. It was only after Genesis threatened Miss Martini that she would never see her kid again, never see her grandkids, that Miss Martini felt the need to send this note. This doesn't prove intent to cause harm. They failed to meet that element. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if at the end of today's trial you do believe that Harper Martini did intend to cause harm to Genesis Petrillo, specifically by poisoning the bottle of Cara wine, the plaintiff still hasn't met all their burden in today's case. There's a third element they have to prove. They have to prove that Miss Petrillo suffered a harmful contact and relate that to the act that Miss Martini supposedly did. Now, I want to be very clear. The cause of death in today's case is respiratory arrest. Today, the point of contention is what caused Mr. Petrillo to actually go into respiratory arrest. The plaintiff so badly wants you to believe that because pesticides were found in Mr. Petrillo's body, that the only reasonable explanation for his cause of death was pesticide poisoning. But they have to tie that link. They have to connect those dots, and they haven't. Because you heard that it's actually quite common for individuals to consume pesticides. Pesticides and wine is quite the norm. You heard that the health inspector actually went to Peony Estates, tested their wine, and all of them contained pesticides. Now, what their own expert couldn't tell you is how much pesticide was found in Miss Petrillo's body. They're alleging that because there was excess pesticides found in Miss Petrillo's body, that caused her to die, but it didn't. Today, you heard exactly how much Miss Petrillo drank. Now, while Dr. Cannon can't give you any scientific basis to how her peak was above 0.30, we can't tell that it was much higher than 0.16. Even Dr. Kwan, the plaintiff's own expert, agreed that the peak BAC for Mr. Petrillo was higher than 0.16. He had tequila shots, he had champagne, he had the entire bottle of Cara wine, he had multiple cocktails. You heard that Dr. Kwan actually managed to give Mr. Petrillo the antidote for pesticide poisoning, but it didn't work. The reason it didn't work is because Mr. Petrillo never had pesticide poisoning. He died from alcohol poisoning. Now today, the burden of proof rests solely on the plaintiff. As defense, we didn't have any burden to prove anything to you. We didn't have to call any witness, any evidence, bring any testimony, but we chose to explain and tell you what actually happened to Mr. Petrillo. And what happened to Mr. Petrillo, it truly was a tragedy. That's all it was. Today, at the end of today's trial, we ask that you find Miss Martini not liable. Because the plaintiff had to prove by a preponderance of the evidence, or more likely than not, that Miss Petrillo intended to cause harm to Genesis, and that's why she died. And they failed to meet that burden.
We have appealed to have run out of time.
Not liable.
Thank you.
Yes, Your Honor.
I'm not sure if the plaintiff has time left for rebuttal.
Yes, Your Honor. I have 50 seconds.
Okay.
May I proceed?
You may.
Now, the defense said that the plaintiff is desperate to find a plan, but members of the jury, we didn't have to look far. The defendant admitted to herself on the stand that she had several plans for Mr. Petrillo during that wedding. And not every story needs a villain. Members of the jury, this is not a story. This is real. And Mr. Petrillo is dead. And the actions caused by the defendant caused his death. Find the defendant liable for battery. Thank you.
All right, folks, thank you very much. I'd like to ask everyone to stick around while the judges tabulate their ballots and get everything submitted. And once I get notice that that's done, we will do some really brief comments. I know it's been a long day for y'all, so we'll keep it quick. If you'll just let me know, Ms. Voth and Ms. Meyer, when you've got confirmation. I can't hear you, Ms. Voth. I'm sorry. I still can't hear you. I'm not getting any audio from you. It's okay. I just saw you talking. I'm not sure. I don't have anything on you to mute you, so. All right. I don't have, Ms. Meyer, do you have confirmation if the ballots have been accepted?
I don't have anything yet. I'm texting Elliot right now to see if. Oh,
okay.
Rebecca says she thinks we're good to go.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what. Why don't you go ahead and make your comments, and we'll see if Ms. Voth can get on. Again, go ahead and proceed. And
awesome.
If you have
okay.
it.
Yeah, great. All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Bridget. I'm a 2L at Baylor this year. I did mock trial for 2 years in undergrad at A&M. So that's who I am. I'm going to make the comments super quick. One personal comment just for like one person. Dominique, I thought you did so well. I really liked your presence the whole time. I think the one way that you can up your game is by making sure you make some objections a little more throughout the round. I just say that to you because I think you did really well, and that's one way that you can make it that much better. But in general, thank you. One thing I saw, make sure, I don't know if anybody was reading a script, but I could see eyes traveling back and forth, and for me, that's a really big deal. I really don't like to see that. I didn't score down for it more than a point because I wasn't for sure, but I'm gonna say if you're online, make sure that it's very apparent that you're not using a script. Also, defense, I liked that your characters utilize their backgrounds. I know like that's not really something we're scoring for, but I thought it was a nice touch that just subliminally was a good move. Obviously watch for time. That was definitely an issue throughout the whole thing. Be careful with that. Yeah, and I think that's it. I really liked the characters also. Everybody did a great job. It was a good mix of credibility with a little bit of character. So good move. That's all I have for y'all.
Ms. Voth, you want to give it a try? No. Can't hear you. That's all right. All right. It was a tightly contested round, really hot topics, and you guys did a great job. I will tell you just a little bit of background on one note for me is that 80% of my docket is a criminal docket, and a good portion of that is DWI cases. And when you get into something like retrograde extrapolation, which is essentially what you're doing, it is a very inexact science, even when you have all the numbers. So it's really important to know the numbers and understand what you have to do to get it in there. The conclusion may be correct, but if you can't lay the foundation all the way, you're subject to getting really objected to and keeping it out. If there was no objection, it's no big deal, but you're vulnerable unless you're really sure about how that formula works and having all the components of it. But outside of that, I really felt like it was a strong round from both teams. I'm looking forward to seeing how this all turns out. So you guys have a great night. I know it's been a long, long day for all of you. You guys take care and be safe wherever you're at.
We just want to say thank you guys for taking the time out of your day to judge. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Thank y'all so much.
Thank y'all.